Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a well-known and highly respected professional from the world of academia from Perth, Australia, Dr. Rajat Ganguly. Rajat, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you. Rajat is the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Asian Security and International Affairs. He's an author of several books and published papers, and his latest book is Containing China, Comparing Asian Strategies. So, Rajat, my first question is that what was the inspiration to get your interest in political science and international security, and how has this shaped your academic journey?
Well, my initial interest was in law, but then I shifted to international relations because I was very influenced by, in the early 80s, by the NAM summit in Delhi, what was happening. There was a lot of stuff happening globally in
Yeah.
the 80s, if you remember.
Mm.
So that piqued my interest. I went to university and I did my bachelor's and master's in India.
Yeah.
And then I left India to go to the States to finish my PhD. And it is, finishing the PhD in the US then started me on my professional journey, which initially was in the US. But then I had this fabulous offer to go to New Zealand, and I thought that if I don't take this, then I probably would regret it for the rest of my life.
Mm.
I'm glad I took it because it was one of the most wonderful experiences in New Zealand.
Mm.
Um, and then, of course, I went from New Zealand to England and then came to Australia about 18 years ago.
Wow.
And Perth has been, absolutely perfect for me. So no complaints.
Fascinating.
So that's how I started.
Mm. And you worked in universities across the US, UK, Australia, and New Zealand. How has your global academic experience influenced your perspective on Asian geopolitics?
I think I'm a beneficiary, probably like you, of looking at Asia both from the inside and outside.
Correct.
Having grown up in India, looking at some of the problems in Asia, I vividly remember the 71 Bangladesh war as a small child.
Yeah.
And then, the Golden Temple, Operation Blue Star, and all that, Indira Gandhi's assassination, and a whole bunch of other stuff that was happening in Asia. And it gave me a certain kind of perspective about life, about politics in Asia. But then when I went outside Asia and when I looked back at Asia from the outside, my perception was that a lot of stuff that was happening in Asia was dictated by outsiders. The power centers of the world were clearly in the global north. A lot of stuff was happening at that level, which was affecting Asian politics. I don't particularly feel that the non-aligned movement, some might say it gave a little bit of a standing to the global south, but probably not that much of a voice. You really get a voice when you acquire power. So things are changing now because now the global south is emerging as an economic powerhouse, a military powerhouse,
Correct.
the rise of China, India, etc. And even countries like South Africa, Brazil, and so on. So I think watching the Asian space or the global south space now from outside is more interesting as the global power dynamics start shifting.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Rajat, let's now talk about Asian security and international affairs, an area that you have a lot of expertise in, and we'll focus on India, China, Pakistan for our discussion today. My first question is, and you're a keen India observer, you're an Indian at heart. How has India's strategic thinking evolved in the post-Cold War and post-Galwan world?
Well, the first thing to say is that the end of the Cold War was a watershed for India, like for many countries.
Yeah.
And this was the start of what we call the unipolar moment. In America, they started talking about American exceptionalism, America as the hegemonic power, etc., etc. And we had to adjust to that because we were not used to that. We were, banking on this old concept of non-alignment, that we are
Yeah.
not going to get involved in Cold War politics.
Hmm.
Uh, but then realities dictated that we couldn't avoid that. I
Hmm.
mean, when you talk about the strategic agreement with Russia, the tilt towards the Soviet Union, etc.,
Hmm.
etc.
Hmm.
But I think reality hit us very hard in 91, 92 with the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Hmm.
Soviet Union was our most ardent supporter,
Correct.
backed us out of many difficult moments in the UN Security Council,
Hmm.
was our principal defense supplier. And with the Soviet economy now in the doldrums, I mean, we didn't really have much of a choice uh, but to correct our posture.
Hmm.
I don't think we gave up on strategic autonomy. I think that is the heart of India's strategic thinking, and rightly so.
Hmm.
But even within that, I think many people would tell you, and I would also probably support that we very pragmatically shifted from this posture of impartiality, non-alignment, to now a more realist posture of polyalignment or multi-alignment. Um, and actually, Prime Minister Modi said it best, I think, a couple of years ago, that we actually wanted friendship with everybody.
Hmm.
So it is not that we were pushing people away. We were saying, if you want to come and join with us, be our friend, we would welcome that. We
Yeah.
want that.
Hmm.
And in a way, it's also a beautiful hedging strategy, because we were not putting all our eggs in one basket.
Correct.
we
Correct.
were we were building ties with Israel, we were building ties with France, we were building ties with the United States, and
Hmm.
particularly in the strategic domain, in the
Hmm.
military domain, and in the
Correct.
economic domain.
Hmm.
And I think over the last 2 decades, maybe 2.5 decades, we have done a lot of work in West Asia, in the Persian Gulf, to develop
Hmm.
relations there, driven primarily by our energy security
Hmm.
needs. The look east and then the act east policy towards the Far East,
Hmm.
Southeast Asia, South Asia, becoming a partner with ASEAN and so on. I think all of that was within the context of a post Cold War reality,
Hmm.
uh, that that whether you like it or not, American hegemony is here to stay. Russia is in no position to bail us out, all the time. I mean, Russia's ability as a defense supplier was very up and down during the 2000s, for example.
Hmm.
And then, of course, there was the growing, menace of China
Yeah.
on our doorstep, and the American support to Pakistan because of Afghanistan and so on.
Hmm.
So we had to become a bit real, and I think this
Correct.
realist recalibration of our foreign policy is something that I like, because at
Hmm.
heart, I'm also a realist.
Absolutely right. Absolutely. The other thing that I wanted to get your thought on was, that there is a significant discussion on India's Act East policy. And at the same time, India has positioned herself as one of the leaders of the global South. I'd
Right.
love to get your perspective on both, on the Act East policy and the global South.
I think they are complementary, if you ask me,
Mm,
because what we are trying to do through the Act East policy is
mm,
not create some kind of an anti-China defensive alliance.
mm.
I think India is very allergic to the term alliance.
Yeah.
We like to talk about multilateralism, sometimes minilaterals,
Mm,
multilateral platforms, collaboration, etc.
mm, mm,
So if you look at India's approach towards countries like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Indonesia, clearly I think this is driven by economic needs, and looking at China. So
mm.
what China is doing to these countries are also looking at us in
Yeah,
order to balance China, or at least the Chinese threat.
correct.
And we are also looking at countries like Australia to partner, not only in terms of economic partnership, minerals, etc., but also education is a big part of that deal,
Right.
uh, and also the people to people linkage, because Australia now has one of the largest Indian diaspora
Mm,
in Asia, in the Indo-Pacific.
yeah.
But I think India's role in BRICS, for example, where we are really one of the founding members of a platform
Mm,
that is probably, in my judgment, going to become the leading platform of the global South.
correct.
And it has Russia, China, India, Brazil, South Africa, and now 5 other new countries joining in, and many
Mm,
more about to come in.
Yeah.
I think this probably is going to catapult India into, that global South leadership in a very prominent way.
Mm.
And India's approach in BRICS, if you follow what has been happening in BRICS meetings, India's approach has been basically to hog the middle road, the middle
Mm.
ground,
Mm.
which is not to project BRICS as a counter to the global north or a
Yeah.
counter to the US
Yeah.
or a threat to the hegemony of the US dollar, etc., etc. But at the same time, also demanding that we shouldn't be taken lightly any longer.
Mm.
The days of when the America called all the shots or Europe called all the shots,
Yeah.
those days are over.
Correct.
We are now doing our own thing,
Mm.
and as Jayashankar said the other day, we want partners, not
Mm.
preachers.
Correct.
And I think that is something that is fantastic to watch from the outside, and
Absolutely.
and and how it's actually riling some of the people in the
I
global
know.
north.
I know. Absolutely. Very well said. Thank you. What a great response. My next question is, in your view, how successful has India been in balancing its strategic autonomy with the growing ties to the US?
It's a fantastic question, and I think for those who study Indo-US relationship, I mean, this is going to be a very crucial, thing to sort of put our heads together.
Mm.
My gut feeling is that we have not compromised on strategic autonomy,
Yeah.
and that shows in the way we handled, this bombastic claim by Trump that he brokered a ceasefire deal between
Correct.
India and Pakistan.
Yeah. Yeah.
We basically told him in no uncertain terms that that was not the case.
Yeah.
We received many phone calls from many concerned countries,
Mm.
but that is not the same thing as mediation or brokering.
True.
And we told the Americans, you can go take a walk when they offered to mediate in Kashmir, for
Mm.
example. That
Mm.
is a bilateral thing. So if
Yeah.
we were not thinking autonomously,
Mm.
we couldn't have said that.
Mm.
My own sense is that while we have retained it, and there have been many friction points with the US, for
Mm.
example, our stance on the Ukraine war, for example,
Mm.
or um, America did approach India to become a Asian partner in NATO,
Mm.
and we said no,
Mm.
which upset the Biden administration
Yeah.
no end up.
Mm.
So our refusal to toe the American line on many things.
Mm.
But at the same time, what we have said to them or signaled to them is we are open for business, and we think that this business is actually beneficial for both sides.
Mm.
While we would like your investments, we would like, for example, Apple to come and build, iPhones and MacBooks in India.
Mm.
This would be actually beneficial to even the US to have a steady supply chain. India as the manufacturing hub of the world compared to China, etc.,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah.
And and as you know, America being a pluralist society, there are multiple voices in America.
Mm.
There are some within the establishment who are very pro India. They see this point, but then there are equally some who don't see it that way. And my own reading is that with Trump, it will be a bit problematic because he's a very transactional kind of guy. There are no ethics, or there are no principles involved here.
Mm.
If you follow what his people have been doing in Pakistan recently,
Mm.
especially the crypto deal,
Yeah.
Trump saying that he would love to trade with Pakistan.
Mm.
Pakistan has so many beautiful things to trade.
I
I mean,
know.
some of that stuff, especially coming at the back of this 88-hour war,
Yeah.
I don't think anybody in India appreciated that.
Absolutely.
And there are many Americans who have told me, I've got lots of friends in America, that even they were astounded by
Yeah.
what this guy was actually saying.
Mm.
That, why, if you really want a big partner in Asia, I mean,
Mm.
you've got Japan, you've got South Korea, you've got Australia.
Mm.
I mean, it defies logic that, you don't want to consider India into that. The
Absolutely.
fourth largest economy in the world, about
Yeah.
to become the third largest.
Yeah. 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 Very well
But
said.
but this is what you get.
Absolutely. I agree. I agree. So let's now talk about the next few questions I've about China, and then I've got a few questions on Pakistan.
Okay.
Um, how do ASEAN nations differ in their responses to China's assertiveness in the South China Sea?
Okay. Good question. I think ASEAN countries are very clear about one thing,
Mm.
that economically they need China. So this is a reality which has been in existence in Asia for at least 3,000 years, Ashutosh.
Hmm.
And everybody in Asia understands this, that without China, we are dead.
Correct.
Economically, we need China.
Absolutely.
But then on the other hand, nobody likes to be bullied around, right? I mean, in schoolyards also, if you meet that big bombastic guy who tries to push kids around, I mean, no kid really welcomes that. So
Correct.
Asia has that mentality as well. But
Hmm.
I think what I've heard from a lot of Asian scholars is
Hmm.
that the way China is reacting in Asia, particularly with the South China Sea,
Hmm.
it is also driven by this very provocative behavior of the United States
Hmm.
in creating bases, the freedom of navigation operations, which are very provocative because you run your warships, by the eastern coast of China all the time.
Hmm.
I mean, just imagine if the Chinese were to run their warships around the eastern seabed of the United States,
Yeah.
around Washington, around New
Hmm.
York, around Boston. I mean, Americans wouldn't like it either,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
So this reaction that you are getting from the Chinese, that we don't
Hmm.
want Americans or Europeans or Australians to enter the South China Sea,
Hmm.
or we don't want Japan's military to grow because of the historic memory of what Japan had done to them.
Hmm. Hmm.
Don't forget the rape of Nanking is
Yeah.
still a like a watershed event in Chinese history.
Hmm.
Some of that, I think, the Asian leaders would tell you, the Asian scholars would tell you,
Hmm.
that this is psyching out the Chinese a little bit.
Hmm.
There was a time when the Chinese didn't have the power to do anything about it,
Hmm.
so they kept quiet. But now that they have got the power, they're not going to keep quiet, and they're going to try and push the Americans out of the first island chain, then the second island chain.
Hmm.
And the message to Asia is, I think, very clear. We have never harmed Asia for 3,000 years. We have
Hmm.
always traded with Asia, but we were always the big guy on the block. You
Hmm.
understand that, and you adjust with that,
Hmm.
and you deal with that.
Yeah.
So, why should this be become a zero sum relationship? It
Hmm.
shouldn't be. It has
Absolutely.
never been historically.
Well said. Well said. And could you also reflect a little bit on the India-China border conflict? And what are some of the strategic underlying, or what are some of the underlying strategic motives from both sides?
That's a very interesting question again. And my own sense is that, look, if the Chinese wanted to capture, if the aim was to capture territory from us, because they do have territorial claims against us, right, on the border,
Hmm.
particularly on the eastern side,
Yeah.
Arunachal Pradesh and all that. They haven't made any major moves towards that end. So
Hmm.
so we can't say that that they basically mobilized in order to launch a war where they will come in and they'll grab territory before we can even blink. They haven't done that.
Hmm.
But on the other hand, what they have done in Ladakh, especially the Galwan incident that happened, was, in my judgment, a tactical move to prevent India from occupying, you know, height positions of height,
Hmm.
particularly in the Demchok, Depsang
Yeah.
plains area, from where India could actually threaten Aksai Chin.
Hmm.
So one of my PhD students who actually wrote on this and published a book a few years ago.
Hmm.
So when we were talking about this, what we thought was that some of the Modi government's ministers' statements, particularly with regards to Jammu and Kashmir,
Hmm.
particularly with regards to Aksai Chin,
Hmm.
you may remember, Amit Shah declaring in Parliament
Yeah.
uh, that Aksai Chin is part of Indian territory,
Yeah.
and jaan de denge, but Aksai
Hmm.
Chin nahi denge.
Hmm. Hmm.
Resolution in the Parliament
Yeah.
about J&K, which will
Hmm.
threaten, China's CPEC,
Hmm.
investments in Pakistan, etc.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
think it spooked the Chinese.
Yeah.
I mean, bottom line is, what I'm saying is that the Chinese had a very grand plan that we will manage India by manipulating the Indian political parties. They have
Correct.
done that.
Yeah.
Congress has taken a lot of money from them. The
Yeah.
communists have taken a lot of money from them. So
Hmm.
they basically didn't have to do much about India
Hmm.
because they handled India from within.
Hmm.
All of a sudden, this game changed after 2014 with Modi coming to power.
Absolutely.
That same game, that I will control BJP, manipulate BJP, isko paisa khilayenge, will give them money. That model was thrown out, and all of a sudden, these guys didn't know what is the intention of the Indian leadership?
Right.
Are they seriously planning to launch an attack to,
Mm,
retake Aksai Chin?
mm,
Are they going to, they've abrogated the Article 370, 35A in Kashmir. Are
mm,
they now going to launch an attack to reoccupy POK? Because some of the stuff they were saying in Parliament,
mm,
I mean, what interpretation do you make of that? That is
mm.
India getting ready to launch an attack
Yeah. Yeah.
against us? And so before anything, let's move the chess pieces a little bit so
Mm,
that we can get some tactical advantage
mm.
in Ladakh.
Very well said.
And I think that's what they did. They also understood. I mean, I've heard this from many Chinese scholars. They also understood that they can't sustain a war against India
Mm,
so far away from the mainland.
mm.
I mean, if you actually look at the map and if you see on the Chinese side of the LSE
Mm.
line of control, line of
Right.
actual control LSE, you will realize that supplying these forces, bringing food, medicine, medical equipments, your fuel, your ammunition, your weapons, will be a mind-boggling task for the Chinese.
I agree.
So if there is a war, which they don't want, and if they are caught in it for 3 months or 4 months or 6 months,
Mm.
I mean, they will not probably be able to defend Aksai Chin,
Yeah,
is my guess.
I agree with you.
And as a result of that, I think what they are doing is they are trying to sort of psych us out a little bit by saying, we are moving forward, we are going to stop your patrolling because we can't actually understand your intention, what you are trying to do.
Mm,
So
mm.
when you don't understand the intention of your enemy, you tend to make worst case scenario analysis,
Correct.
and
Correct.
you act on that. So
And
which is I think what they did.
absolutely. And that example you gave me of the big bully is exactly what the Chinese do, that I will hit you, I will hit you, I'll hit you. But the moment you stand up and say, okay, try it, then they back
Yeah.
off.
Then
So,
they back off, and they will do that. They will keep
correct.
on poking you, and they'll discover in a little sensitive area, they'll poke you a little bit more,
Yeah,
and they'll test you out.
absolutely. Um, Given the time, Rajat, I'm going to now shift to a couple of questions on Pakistan.
Okay.
And I would have loved to just talk, but you got so much to share with. But I'm going to ask you for another conversation in a few weeks or a few months.
Okay.
My question on Pakistan is that is Pakistan's alignment with China a strategic necessity or a geopolitical gamble?
Look, for Pakistan, I mean, the dependence on China is basically what's keeping Pakistan alive.
Hmm,
Um, everything is coming from China.
correct.
Not just military, weapons, ammunition, etc., but money is also coming from China.
Hmm,
Pakistan has basically become, a Chinese satellite state.
absolutely.
Everything is controlled by China, right?
Hmm, hmm,
And why? So if you want to switch the question and ask it from the Chinese point of view, that
hmm,
what is it that you guys are getting
hmm,
with Pakistan?
hmm,
Most Chinese would tell you, most of their analysts would tell you that we actually don't like what we are doing in Pakistan because it's a net loss for us. We are
hmm,
just sinking money, throwing money into a country
hmm,
which we don't like, which we hate. We have no cultural affinity, etc., etc.,
hmm,
and it's a huge drain for us
hmm.
in that sense. But on the other hand, I think China's worry is twofold. One is the One Belt, One Road initiative
Yeah,
project, the CPEC, and the whole purpose of the One Belt, One Road initiative project was to diversify the supply routes into China. So
absolutely.
which is why, they want to build the Gwadar port, they want to
Hmm,
bring stuff to the port,
yeah,
and then through land corridor, they will transport these goods and services
correct.
into Western China. So
Correct.
this is one preoccupation, right? And the other preoccupation is about their restive Western China province, the
Yeah,
Xinjiang province.
absolutely.
There is the East Turkestan liberation movement, that secessionist movement there, Muslim, Uyghur, Turkic people,
Hmm,
who have never accepted Han Chinese rule. So their worry is that if we don't have leverage in Pakistan, then Pakistan, Afghanistan could become staging ground for
hmm,
these Islamist jihadi type,
hmm,
insurgency problem in Western China.
hmm.
So to keep a lid on that, we need to cultivate not just Pakistan,
Yeah,
Afghanistan, but also countries like Tajikistan and
hmm,
Kazakhstan,
correct.
which bordered that area.
Yes.
So you might be knowing that China has got advanced military lookout post inside Tajikistan.
Mm.
And they are incredibly worried by the Wakhan corridor, which
Mm.
links Afghanistan to the Chinese border.
Yeah.
So it's a narrow ledge of land
Mm.
over Pakistan through which Afghanistan comes to the China border.
Mm.
And I think the Afghan-China border probably is just around 70 kilometers,
Wow.
in length. But nonetheless, I mean, that allows many of these forces to
Mm.
come to have a base in Afghanistan
Mm.
and then go and attack China, through that corridor. So,
Mm.
so the security of Western China, which is, one of their vital nuclear storage point and all that, is very important to them. So is the economic model of diversification of supply routes, because one of their strategic worry is the Malacca choke point dilemma,
Correct.
that we are bringing everything through the
Yeah.
Strait of Malacca,
Yeah. Mm.
and that's where American, Australian, Indian Navy acting together
Mm.
with
Mm.
perhaps Japanese Navy can totally create a
Abs-
blockade for us, and
Absolutely.
and we are going to starve to death. I mean, if that happens.
Absolutely.
So all of this is keeping in mind, those geo-economic, geopolitical, geostrategic
Mm.
priorities for China.
Mm. Amazing.
So which is why they have to keep Pakistan alive.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Pak, that the road gives them access to the warm waters of the Middle East, which they don't have access otherwise. But one
That's
last
true.
question.
That's true. Through Gwadar, and
Correct.
plus there are other fringe benefits. I
Yeah.
mean, a lot of people don't know this, but many, because of China's very skewed sex ratio,
Mm.
because of the one-child policy, they now are sitting on a demographic time bomb. For
Yes.
every four men, there is one woman in
Yes.
China.
Yes.
So, so a lot of Pakistani girls from very poor families are being married to these Chinese
Mm.
guys, and they take them back to China as wives from
Wow.
Pakistan. They
Wow.
are doing the same with Myanmar, the northern
Mm.
area of Myanmar, which borders
Mm.
southern China.
Mm.
I mean, these Chinese attackers come and suddenly attack villages in Myanmar across the border. And
Mm.
they come and kidnap these women and take them
Yes.
back inside China. So
I
some of that stuff is happening.
Yeah.
And one of the export items from Pakistan to China
Mm.
is donkey.
Donkey. Yes.
So yeah, so the Chinese are very fond of donkey meat now,
Mm. Yes.
especially in rural areas. So so
Yes.
so Pakistan provides steady supply of donkeys,
I know. I
steady
know.
supply of young women.
I
So some of those fringe benefits are there too.
Wow. Wow. And my last question for you, Rajat. I'm sometimes I'm feeling so greedy that I wish I could keep talking because I'm learning so much with you. But my last question for you, and this is on India Pakistan. Do you see any
Sure.
future for India Pakistan normalization, or are we locked into strategic hostility?
This is a very difficult question.
I
The
know.
first part of the question is I don't see a lot of chance for
Correct.
normalization.
I agree.
There is a line of thinking globally,
Mm.
especially from the liberal school of thought,
Mm.
that if Pakistan were to become a civilian democratic country
Mm.
ruled by civilians, then
Mm.
perhaps two democracies can sit down and normalize.
Mm.
And Pakistan has had, if you remember, after Musharraf left, successive civilian governments.
Mm.
But the real question is, who actually runs Pakistan? So
Correct.
a lot of people will tell you, countries have a military, but in Pakistan's case, there's a military which has a country, and
Mm.
everything is controlled by the military.
Mm.
And the military has become completely Islamicized. And
Correct.
Asim Munir is an example of that. That probably
Absolutely.
after Ziaul Haq, he's probably a ardent religious fanatic,
Yes.
who's become the head of the Pakistani army, right?
Yes.
I
Yes.
mean, some of the other generals were probably more realist than
Mm.
Islamists, but
Mm.
Asim Munir clearly is an Islamist.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
agenda is jihad.
Correct.
A lot of people also don't know this, and it's probably fair to say that if you
Mm.
go to the Pakistani Army's website, their
Mm.
website says the three mottos of the Pakistani Army are Iman, Taqwa, and Jihad fi sabilillah. So
Mm.
jihad, their motto is jihad.
And
So they see themselves as an Islamic army
mm.
waging jihad on India. But
Mm.
jihad for what? For
Mm.
Ghazwa-i-Hind,
Correct.
to win control of Hindustan.
Yeah.
And then you go into Islamic philosophy and all that.
Mm.
Why do they want
Yeah.
Ghazwa-i-Hind?
Yeah.
So I don't want to complicate things, but
Yeah.
the answer is no. India, Pakistan probably can't normalize.
Mm.
I think the best outcome for India would be a splintering of Pakistan into 3, 4 countries, smaller
Absolutely.
countries, which you can probably manage better.
Mm.
But then, don't forget there are nuclear weapons involved in the discussion.
Mm.
There are American strategic interest involved, Western strategic interest, China's strategic interest. So if you take all of this into consideration, I think India eventually will have to come to some kind of a grand bargain or grand accommodation with China.
Mm.
Uh, I mean, my thought in this preliminary thought is that if Pakistan splinters and if we come into controlling at least Punjab and
Correct.
Sindh, because
Correct.
Balochistan will be independent,
Mm.
the Pathan areas will probably go back to Afghanistan because these were
Afghanistan.
originally Afghan lands anyway.
Yeah.
So if we control a chunk of what is today's Pakistani Punjab and Sindh, so
Mm.
from Karachi all the way up to you know um, Skardu, and from Skardu to the northern areas into Kashgar into
Mm.
China,
Mm.
maybe a grand bargain could be that India will say to China that yes, we will normalize with you, you accept all of this,
Mm.
and we will allow this economic corridor to
To
Western
go through.
China
Correct.
to go through our territory. So
Yes.
so deal will be with us,
Yeah.
not something called Pakistan.
Correct. Correct.
And we can also take into account some of the strategic concerns of the US and the
Mm.
West in
Mm.
that part of the world, because they have a strategic game with Russia, which
Absolutely.
which they are playing. So we
Yes.
have to take into account that as well.
Yes.
But
Yes.
but I think something will have to be done, because this way, I mean, a lot of people are saying, oh, now we have taught Pakistan a big lesson, so there won't be any terrorist attack. I'm
No,
not so optimistic. I think
it's
I
going to
think
start soon again, I'm sure.
it will start again. It will start again.
Absolutely. I agree. But on that note, Rajat, I just want to say what an amazing conversation this has been for me, for my viewers and listeners. And, we managed to cover, as they say, in this conversation, you've just given me an appetizer. But the main course, I'm sure, will come in several more conversations. I'd love to talk to you about the Quad in more detail. I'm personally a very great follower of geopolitics of this region, and I
Right.
do write myself also.
Right.
But I'd love to get your amazing insights into the Quad, into more inputs on India China, because I think that's a very important strategic relationship that India needs to develop while keeping our eyes and ears open as two major powers
Absolutely.
in Asia. I'd love to
Absolutely.
talk to you more about India USA. I'd love to talk to you more about the Indian Ocean. So I'm going to schedule more conversations with you, but thank you so much for talking to me today. It's been a complete eye opener for me and lots of learning. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. It was a pleasure talking to you, Ashutosh, and I look forward to more conversations with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the brand called You Videocast and Podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the brand called You.